Right people, remember to subscribe, that way you'll know when I upload the next video and you'll be supporting my channel. Also follow me on Twitter. Sometimes YouTube doesn't send notification, this way you'll know when I upload the next video. Alright ladies and gents, 2003 Iraq War, animated history by the channel Armchair Historian. Now, Iraq War. There has been many key important wars in history, but I feel like Iraq War is, one of those wars that has some massive impacts globally. So I think that everyone should know a bit about Iraq War here and there. So I have some knowledge about this. So before I start the video, I'm gonna say what I know about it. If it's correct or not, I don't know, we'll see in the video. But Iraq War. I think Iraq War started when the Bush organization claimed that Saddam Hussein has weapon of mass destruction. It just means has a tons of nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, things like that. And that Saddam Hussein is also funding Al-Qaeda, the terrorist organization. And remember, this is back in 2003. So I think that, this invasion of Iraq, it's not just because of weapons of mass destruction claim. I think it was, the key point there was that Saddam Hussein is funding Al-Qaeda, the terrorist organization. Because just about 2 years ago, 9/11 happened. And people were really pissed about it. I think that was one of the main reasons why Bush organization can invade Iraq and American people would still be behind them. Because let's be honest, weapons of mass destruction, people say that about Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Nobody's invading that country. So I don't think weapons of mass destruction was the alone claim on which Bush organization could have invaded Iraq. I think it was that Saddam Hussein is funding and helping Al-Qaeda, the terrorist organization. That was one of the main thing that got the people behind them. Even though there was lots of protests, Bush could have, invade the country without much of a massive backlash because of that claim. Now, what happened was afterwards they learned that there was no weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein didn't have them. And Saddam Hussein had no relations with Al-Qaeda. So what basically happened was George Bush and his organization basically used these two false claims to invade Iraq because of, I think, two reasons. One was something related to his father, the former president. Some personal history between them, and second was, I think, the need of oil. Iraq had a lot of oil and US was in oil crisis. So this is the two claims that people come up with, that was the main reason behind the war, and all the other reasons were just false things, just said that so they could invade Iraq without much of a backlash. Now this is what I heard from people and read in the years before. So I had some knowledge about it. Now how much of this is true, how much of this is false, I don't know. I guess we'll see in this video. Alright, so let's watch the video.
It is April 10th, 2003. F-16 fighters scream to life on a nearby tarmac, while C-130 cargo planes are loaded up with supplies. A handful of soldiers play cards on a makeshift table, trying to distract themselves from the anxiety in the air. They are American, British, Australian, and Polish. All are exhausted by the long approach to the capital, but they know that the fighting is not over yet. As another plane departs for Baghdad, the Australian announces "Royal Flush" and lays down his cards. The others groan. He's won. But this is no ordinary game of poker. On each card, the face of a high-ranking Iraqi official is printed. They include generals, ministers, and, on the ace of spades, the president himself, Saddam Hussein. It is useful for the soldiers to familiarize themselves with these men. Soon enough, they'll be hunting them.
Damn, that is something, man. I had no idea the soldiers did that. They played cards with the faces of these key important people so they could remember them. Damn, that is some next level thing.
Before we begin, I'd like to briefly talk about today's sponsor, Blinkist. A common dilemma our researchers face is an overload of information. Although it's never been easier to acquire it, the sheer amount of data available on the internet often makes it hard to gather the key points needed for an accurate depiction of events. But fortunately, Blinkist provides an excellent solution by providing condensed but accurate summaries of over 3,000 books by notable authors that they can cancel.
Yeah, people, go to blinkist.com/the armchair historian and support the channel
At any time, followed by a 25% discount on full membership if they choose to stick with the service. Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. Today, we will be covering the 2003 invasion of Iraq, sometimes referred to as the Second Gulf War, which saw hundreds of thousands of troops committed to an invasion that ended with the deposition of a dictator. While we will cover some of the political background and context of this much-discussed conflict, this video will primarily focus on the combat, maneuvers, and objectives of the momentous invasion that sparked an 8-year occupation and insurgency. But first, if you haven't had the chance to check out our video on the first Iraq War, here is a quick recap. After it ended with Iraqi forces being expelled from Kuwait, the US soldiers sought to protect Kurdish and Shiite minorities in Iraq by enforcing no-fly zones and launching airstrikes against strategic sites such as oil fields and military bases. But following Saddam Hussein's repeated refusal to cooperate with UN weapon inspectors, the United States passed the Iraqi Liberation Act, which officially solidified the goal of regime change in the country. At the time, though, this act simply consisted of providing millions of dollars to numerous opposition groups in the country, with the hope of
Alright, so Saddam didn't help the situation in any way, refusing the UN in checking things.
toppling Saddam's government. In late 2002, the United States began building a case against the Ba'athist government of Iraq and sought the support of the UN Security Council. On top of the claimed ties to al-Qaeda, the Bush administration had a laundry list of justifications for armed intervention, including the mistreatment of civilians and the aforementioned expulsion of UN weapons inspectors. Perhaps foreseeing how controversial these accusations would be in the future, many in the UN Security Council strenuously objected to the proposed invasion, insisting that America pursue a diplomatic solution instead. But even while the council debated, CIA teams were landing in Iraq to lay the groundwork for a full-scale invasion. The US had already made up its mind. Saddam's regime was doomed. Moving quickly, members of the Special Activities Division established contact with the Kurdish Peshmergas who opposed Saddam. Then, they began identifying key elements.
While they're debating, he already, President Bush already deployed the teams in CIA. So it's like, regardless of what happens where, this is happening. I'm president. That's gangster, man. This, I think, Iraq war was, so significant is because the effects of Iraq wars was so significant. Because what Iraq war did was brought lots of instability in the area. What that means is the result of this war created so much issue, and because of it, so many people rose up with hate that so many terrorist organizations brought up after this. So lots of terrorist organization was now in rise. And more than that, US and entire world for that had some financial crisis because of this. So this war alone caused lots of issues that we are even feeling today with a massive terrorist organization, and had a massive financial issues. I think this thing led to the 2008 Wall Street crash. I'm not so sure about it, but I think it was started from here. So lots of financial issues, lots of instability in Middle East and everything. This war instigated lots of issues.
Of Iraqi leadership. This intelligence would be used to devastating effect in the opening days of the conflict, with surgical airstrikes killing many high-ranking officers. Additionally, the Special Activities Division captured a chemical weapons factory, yet despite Secretary of State Colin Powell's vivid descriptions of mobile weapons laboratories on the backs of trucks and train cars, the facility was the only one of its kind found during the entire Iraq War. Unsurprisingly, these preemptive strikes did not help America's case to the UN, which continued to call for de-escalation. Key NATO members, such as France and Canada, were also highly vocal in condemning America's aggression. Opposition around the world mounted, culminating with the largest recorded protest in human history when on February 15, 2003, over 6 million people in 800 cities gathered to protest the war. Nevertheless, in March of 2003, the United States and the Coalition of the Willing, which included the United Kingdom, Poland, and Australia, among others, began massing troops in the region. Unlike the war fought 12 years earlier, they would be advancing without UN approval. The invasion began slowly. The first phase consisted of numerous airstrikes and covert raids on targets within the country, with varying degrees of success. One of the first of these was the Battle of Al-Qaim on March 17th, when units of the British Special Air Service attacked a suspected chemical weapons site housed in a water treatment facility near the Syrian border. But the Iraqi defenders put up an unexpectedly spirited defense, and the commando team was forced to withdraw under heavy fire. Frustrated, they called in an airstrike, leveling the entire facility and obliterating any potential evidence that chemical weapons were being held in the facility. Another strike occurred 2 days later at a community just outside Baghdad called Dura Farms. Believing that Saddam was visiting his sons in the area, the United States saturated the area with 8,000 pounds of ordnance and 40 Tomahawk cruise missiles in an attempt.
These are some big cities in Iraq, man, Baghdad and things like that. How many civilian casualties were there? Because if it's a lot, I mean, this is some strong thing, man.
To wipe the Iraqi dictator off the face of the earth. However, every single satellite-guided warhead missed its target, and as a result, over a dozen civilians were injured and one killed. To complete the debacle, it was later discovered that Saddam's last visit to the area had been nearly a decade ago. Despite these issues, the main invasion was finally getting underway. Based on the precedent set in the first Gulf War and Afghanistan, most observers had expected.
Alright, you know what? I don't know if Bush had proper intelligence about WMD and Al-Qaeda relations or whatever, or was all those was just lies. Even if this was the evidence that they got or intel that they got, the way they are operating here is really bad, man. Especially for United States, UK, and other Austria and other this coalition. These are some major countries who should have better intel. They just thought that Saddam Hussein visited there, even though he hasn't been there for 10 years, and they just bombed the place without even thinking about human civilian casualties. Lots of people got injured, and the missiles even missed its original target. I mean, this is too sloppy for countries like this. I understand why people are really pissed about why Bush did this attack. Because even if it was with better intel and more coordinated than it was, maybe people would have been less pissed than they are. But this was seriously sloppy.
a lengthy period of aerial bombardment before any ground offensive. However, the coalition instead opted to launch a rapid air and ground campaign that would avoid most urban areas and focus on decapitating the Iraqi government. This tactic, later called shock and awe, was chosen for two reasons. First, American leaders assumed that if the command structure was eliminated, organized resistance would disintegrate. Second, it was hoped that the civilian population would support the Americans as liberators. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld was particularly optimistic about this, stating, "There will be Iraqis who offer not only to help us, but to help liberate the country and free the Iraqi people." As we will
Yeah, I mean, let's say Iraqi people hated Saddam Hussein. Still, they're not going to trust a foreign country who suddenly just came unannounced and started bombing the place without even thinking, injuring a lot of Iraqi people and killing even some of them. This sends a message that we don't much care about you Iraqi civilians much. We just want to overthrow Saddam Hussein. Why would Iraqi people would then be happy that you came? So of course that didn't happen. I'm pretty sure that didn't happen.
see, this wasn't totally the case. On the night of March 19th, members of the 160th Airborne, known as the Night Stalkers, destroyed more than 70 Iraqi military outposts along the southern and western borders. With the path cleared, coalition forces advanced from Kuwait in two prongs, one directed north and one south. A combined air and amphibious assault was also launched on the Al-Faw Peninsula on March 20th, with the goal of securing the critical oil infrastructure located there. American, British, and Polish commandos all worked tirelessly to capture the offshore platforms before they could be sabotaged by the defenders. Despite significant resistance from entrenched Iraqis supported by artillery fire, the teams were able to secure the peninsula after a grueling 3-day battle. Their efforts likely prevented a major ecological disaster and saved billions of dollars worth of equipment that Saddam would otherwise have destroyed in a petty act of revenge. Unfortunately for the coalition, this would be the last bit of good PR they would receive for quite some time. As we'll see in the Part 2, which is out right now, the war for Iraq was just beginning, and even this initial taste of victory had been soured by the clumsy handling of Al-Qaim and the disaster at Dura Farms. While coalition casualties remained minimal, intelligence failures would continue to plague future operations, muddying the overall picture of the war in Iraq to such an extent that many details remain unclear to this day. Thanks to Blinkist for sponsoring this video.
So I think what happened here was the Bush and Bush organization basically, without giving it time, gathering much information and intel, they just went in to invade, and that caused all these sloppy issues. Damn, this is one of the sloppiest attacks of all time, man. This sloppiness caused lots of instability in the area too, because basically terrorist organization went to a lot of people in the area, and basically they gave the mentality of they can just invade us like that and cause this much chaos. What is stopping them from doing that in the future, regardless of whatever reason? So this caused people to hate US and bring arms against them and creating all this terrorist organization. So you can't just without thinking just invade some place without thinking backlash later, man. This was seriously sloppy. Alright, we'll see the second part next time. If you like my reaction, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Well, ladies and gents, this is 2003 Iraq War Part 2 Animated History by the channel Armchair Historian, or the Second Persian Gulf War is the other name for this war. In the first part, we saw that Bush organization invaded Iraq, and the reasons they gave felt like much of an excuse than real reasons. Now, did they have bad intel, or were they just excuses? People can speculate. but there was massive protests everywhere. UN was debating whether they should go to the war or not. There was massive debate, but Bush organization didn't care. They were already in Iraq, thinking how to invade, and CIA was already there, gathering all the intel and reconnaissance. They invaded Iraq spontaneously. Their intel was bad and the strategy was sloppy because they attacked lots of places. And the intel was so bad that they attacked a place where Saddam wasn't even been there for 10 years, and they attacked that place. Lots of missiles were launched. Lots of missiles missed their target and hit the civilian area, and it probably caused a lot of civilian casualties. So it was a blunder operation all around. They thought the Iraqi people would accept them with open arms, but the spontaneous nature of the attack and lots of civilian casualties, obviously that would not be the case. Iraqi people didn't accept them with open arms, and it was just all around a bad attack with a sloppy approach and bad intel, especially knowing the countries are United States, UK, Austria, and whatever others, the coalition of the countries. These are some big countries. They should have better intel than that, especially when they're attacking place like Iraq, because clearly they are way more powerful than Iraq can ever be. They should have better intel, and they should have conducted the operations properly than they did. So it was bad all around. So let's watch the second part now.
Before we continue our look at the war, I'd like to take a moment to thank Squarespace, our sponsor for this video. Squarespace is your go-to resource for web design, giving you everything you need to start an online business or community hub, or even share your intelligence about WMDs. Squarespace features a comprehensive suite of developer tools that lets you customize your domain in any way you desire. Essential additions such as support for podcasts, integrated analytics, and social media sharing buttons are also standard with every package, enabling you to reach a target audience no matter how loudly they might be protesting at your international military activities. Go to squarespace.com/armchairhistorian for 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain. Using the link in the description really helps out our channel.
Jab at the boss.
The first major engagement began on March 23rd, when a maintenance convoy of the 3rd U.S. Infantry Division took a wrong turn into Nasiriyah, right into the headquarters of the Iraqi 3rd Corps. Caught in a hastily prepared ambush, 15 of the 18 vehicles were destroyed by heavy weapons fire, and 18 U.S. soldiers were killed or captured. But
I was just saying how the intel were bad and there were lots of blunder, and the video starts like this. I mean, come on, man. That is just too bad for the countries that we are talking about right now. This shouldn't happen. This is too bad of an intel. It's not that just casualties on Iraqi side. Even the American soldiers are dying for no reason because of the bad intel. They take wrong turns. I mean, come on, really?
Strategic bridges over Nasiriyah's modestly named Saddam Canal were secured later that day after men from the 2nd Marine Division stormed the city, suffering heavy casualties from the determined Iraqi defenders. As if the intense urban combat wasn't enough, 6 Marines were also killed in a friendly fire incident when an A-10 Warthog mistakenly attacked their amphibious vehicle. Finally, on the evening of March 24th...
Come on, man. Warthog attacked their own vehicle. What countries are we talking about? I mean, seriously. If India did this kind of blunder, I would still be amazed. And that's India. We are talking about United States, UK, Austria. I mean, come on. This is just too bad of a... No, obviously, people are still taking jabs at Bush for this very bad attack, because this is just bad all around.
The Marines broke through and established a perimeter north of the city, which held up despite multiple counterattacks by Iraqi forces and the Fedayeen Saddam militia, who were fanatical not only about Saddam, but apparently also about Darth Vader. Further north was the town of Najaf, which was situated close to highways leading to the important cities of Karbala and Baghdad. Due to its strategic location, coalition forces decided not to bypass Najaf. and instead chose to isolate the town out of fears it could become a staging area for attacks against American supply lines. To accomplish this, the coalition needed to capture the bridges to the north and south of the town. Elements of the 1st Brigade combat team attacked the northern bridge, codenamed Jenkins, in the early hours of March 25th, but made slow progress until they linked up with reinforcements before dawn. The Americans eventually fought their way across the bridge, despite desperate attempts by Iraqi engineers to destroy it. Around the same time, US forces advanced on the southern bridge codenamed Objective Floyd. Resistance by both regular military and militia forces was intense at both sites. On one occasion, an Iraqi drove a city bus at full speed into an M3 Bradley CFV.
That was a big threat right there, that. A bus against a tank. I mean, that's not ordinary bus, that's an anti-tank bus. What the hell was he thinking? That he's gonna drove a bus into a tank? I mean, what's that going to achieve?
On March 26th, Najaf was successfully encircled, and the attackers were relieved by the 101st Airborne. Over the next several days, the Americans swept through the town with tanks and infantry. The 101st deliberately left a single road out of the city open in the hope of using it as a kill zone for escaping troops. On April 1st, some weary Iraqi soldiers took the bait and were ambushed by snipers and helicopter gunships, and the city ultimately fell on April 4th. To the south, British forces had an unexpectedly difficult time taking Basra and its nearby port. Starting on March 27th, they whittled down the Iraqi garrison defending the valuable port over the course of 2 weeks. When they finally gained control of the vital waterway, only 11 Britons had died, while the Iraqis had lost some 40 to 50 times that number. When British armor finally rolled into the city, they were welcomed by jubilant locals, as predicted by US Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. Unfortunately, however, the crowds quickly turned into mobs of looters.
There you go. There you go. I was thinking like, what the hell? There were actually Iraqi people who welcomed with open arms? No, they were just looters.
The final major engagement before coalition forces arrived in Baghdad was at the Battle of Karbala Gap, a roughly 25-mile or 40-kilometer-long strip of land flanked by the Euphrates and Rizaza rivers. Iraqi commanders were well aware of the gap's strategic importance and had placed 2 divisions of the elite Republican Guard to block the Americans' advance. However, Saddam Hussein's son, Qusay, severely weakened the defense by redirecting some of them to the north, which proved to be a fatal mistake. On April 1st, American troops broke through the gap, reaching the Euphrates at the city of Musayyib. Though several Iraqi armored divisions counterattacked on the night of April 3rd, they were driven back by aircraft and rocket fire, and the coalition held on to the important bridgehead. With the path to Baghdad...
That's the gist of it, this war. I mean, there's no hope for this Iraqi people to just fight against this coalition because they are way too powerful. The Iraqi soldiers can get an edge here and there, win a small battle here and there, and then what's going to happen? A fighter plane is going to come and just bomb you, and Indian coalition is going to win anyway. This is a hopeless war if there's ever been one.
Forced open and victory on the horizon, a last bloody struggle for the capital began. While the Iraqi army had almost completely disintegrated at this point, the Ba'athist Party militias holding the city did not hesitate to utilize underhanded tactics to slow the coalition advance. After extended skirmishes with the defenders, Colonel David Perkins launched a surprise thunder run of nearly 30 tanks straight into the city on April 5th. Once behind enemy lines, the column came under intense fire from militiamen disguised as civilians, but Perkins was able to identify their defensive positions and execute a fighting withdrawal. US Marines then stormed the Diyala Bridge on the eastern side of the city and advanced along the northern bank of the Euphrates. Aware that this flank was almost entirely undefended, the nervous troops fired on any car refusing to halt out of fear of suicide bombers. Amidst this carnage, Perkins...
See, there you go. Even some civilians that were just frightened and didn't stop, they were killed because they thought they were suicide bombers. I mean, this war brought on so many civilian casualties. I mean, it must have. There probably unaccounted number here and there. It must have a massive amount of casualties right there. Obviously, the Iraqi people didn't like that this invasion happened because of that. Obviously, that brought on lots of instability. Lots of terrorist organizations grew just because of that hate. That Americans and British and all of them can just invade our country for no reason at all. Because, especially their reasoning that Bush organization gave were, proved to be wrong. So Iraqi people, they can make up any bad excuses and invade our country over and over again. So this caused not just Iraq, but in the Middle East and lots of country to people to rose up because of the distrust towards United States and British and like that. So this caused lots of instability. Lots of terrorist organizations grew after this war. It was just all around bad. ISIS and everything we are seeing right now. This war's effect is we are gonna feel for a long time.
Led another thunder run into the heart of the capital on the 7th and rewarded himself by spending the night in one of Saddam's opulent palaces. After a final desperate defense by the militias, the city was finally captured on April 9th. There were some initial celebrations by Iraqi civilians, including widespread vandalism of statues and portraits depicting the now defeated Saddam. However, as in Basra, massive waves of looting soon followed and continued until US forces cracked down on offenders. But Saddam himself proved elusive and would not be captured for many months. Coalition soldiers would spend their time securing the occupation and searching for other high-value government officials that had escaped the invasion. But as the coalition searched for these officials, violence between Iraq's minority groups soon erupted and insurgents began to assemble. Nonetheless, on May 1st, 2003, off the coast of San Diego, President Bush made a dramatic appearance. Landing on the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, the former Air National Guard aviator wore a flight suit for his televised address in front of a national audience. Standing in front of an enormous banner reading "Mission Accomplished," he announced the end of major combat operations in Iraq. At the time, the proclamation seemed reasonable. The Iraqi military was in shambles, and Saddam Hussein had been reduced from an autocrat to a fugitive. But despite all appearances, the troubles were just beginning. For the next 8 years, the coalition was engaged in a protracted counterinsurgency and suffered heavy casualties, while many thousands of civilians lost their lives. In 2003, the mission may have been accomplished, and the brief conventional phase of fighting was indeed finished. But much like in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq had only just begun. Thanks again to our sponsor, Square.
Guerrilla warfare is really hard to kill. You have to show yourself as a not much of a threat psychologically to the area in order to suppress the guerrilla warfare. Otherwise, people will always rise up if they think you are a massive threat. Certain people can always portray you as a biggest threat to get a lot of soldiers in your side and cause lots of terrorist organizations to rise up. So just basically invading and just defeating certain people, all that's going to create is martyrs. People are just going to see United States and coalition as enemies, which kind of happened. In the Middle East, lots of organizations rose up because of this, lots of terrorist organizations and things like that. And what's stupid about this is, Bush organization took over and won Iraq, sure. But afterwards, obviously, when you invade a country and win, you have to take care of the country afterwards. They weren't prepared for that either. It's like nobody told Bush or something like, yeah, we're going to invade Iraq, we're going to win. But then what? I mean, look at the Russia. Russia, annexed Crimea. And after taking care of Crimea, they kind of went into a massive financial issue. So this is invading Iraq and then taking care of it. I mean, that's going to cause a massive financial issues, obviously. And they weren't prepared for that either. This whole war was so unprepared and sloppy. It's just stupid, man. They could have, they could have still invaded this country if they gathered more intel, they were more strategic rather than spontaneous. If proper people were consulted on this, it would have been much better. But they just went in. People are still debating in the UN and everywhere, and they were already there trying to invade it. Alright, if you like my reaction, please don't forget to like and subscribe.